So, the reason that it came up that I might talk about my mental illness a little bit more on here is because of something I was watching where Dr. Mike was interviewing a psychiatrist, the video that just came out, and it just made me remember that a lot of the time you don't hear many there are limited options when it comes to hearing firsthand accounts of mental illness, because it really is something we don't talk about much still to this day. And so when I first started this channel, I did title it Through Schizoaffective Eyes. That's the little like, I forget what it's called, the handle. So that's what it currently is, the handle. It used to be the whole channel was called that. But and the reason that I called it that is because that's the diagnosis that I have, and um it's something that I've been dealing with for so long that a lot of the times it doesn't even come up as something that I'm talking about a lot. And so I I'm not avoiding the subject. It doesn't always come up. Like, I've made some videos about this, but they weren't many and they weren't that long. And I also made a couple videos in which I think I don't even know what I was going to say. But sorry, that was a mental gap. But I I just when I look at my outline, I made a little outline about this. Let's see here. So I want to talk about my history with mental illness, and I think that it might help somebody to hear where I'm coming from or how I got to be like this, or just my story, my life story, how I feel about mental illness in general. And so I decided to try this video here and to just really try to spell out everything that I can think of in one video. So in when I was a young girl, I weighed about 118 pounds when I was 17 years old. I was very thin. And when I was 17, I was doing really good in school. I had a college that I was going to, and I went off to college. And I had a hard summer. I had had my first ever hard summer, really. I had struggled growing up some with something that could have been depression, maybe. I don't know how you'd put it, but it was never in an episode. It always was just this lingering teenage angst. So it was pretty normal up until that point. And when I went to college, I had Lyme disease the previous year, and that might have contributed neurologically. People say that that can be something that leads to mental illness. Possibly it can connect with that. Anyway, I had a kind of hard summer, and it had been pretty bad, and it just I was pretty fatigued all summer. I was gonna work a job. I had moved to DC. I was from Tennessee, but I moved up to be with my dad for the summer, and that was the plan, but it was a hard summer. And I was going to work for the Environmental Protection Agency because I had landed a job with them already. And I had to like after just going in one day, I found this big bullseye on my back, which is the symptom of a Lyme disease from getting bit by a tick. You can get it where the tick bites you, and I found that a tick had been there, and I took antibiotics, and my family was really vigorous to try to help me get the right treatment. And I took a long course of antibiotics because my dad really pushed for that. But they were all right with me not working that summer. They didn't mind. And so I just had a kind of lethargic summer. And so at the end of summer, I guess like I had everything packed up at home. I guess I went back to Tennessee, and I don't remember a lot, but I do remember that I was going to a college in Indiana, and I mean, it's been a long time. That's why I don't remember it. But I'm much older now, and I'm 41. But so I went to college, and this is where the first episode occurred. It was called a psychotic episode, according to the psychiatrist who ended up seeing me in a hospital in Indiana called Reed Hospital. So I just kind of lost it. I don't know. Like I remember that the scent of things was really profuse to me. And I would go out in the quad, whatever it was called, where you walked on the campus, and everything, like the trees had this smell that like really hit me as really strong. And I don't know if that was even a hallucination, but I don't I don't know. But it was something that really bothered me. And but I was just like completely like in dream state, I guess you could call it. Like all the things that I thought were happening, they were not really the way I thought it was. And like I was like almost like an animal or something. Like I mean like what was going on in my head was like just instinctual responses to the world around me. Like I was something was going on with me. And so I remember trying to call home. I remember not being able to call because I couldn't figure out how to use the phone in the dorm room. I remember I didn't sleep at night a lot of the time, like hardly. I don't think I slept at all that whole week that I was in school. The only week I was in that school, I don't think I slept at all. And I remember feeling like, looking back, I feel sorry for my roommate. She was a really good person, went on to study therapy to be a therapist. She really was a good girl. And I just was like really confusing. Like whatever I was doing was like people were like confused by it. I don't have a lot of explanation for what was going on. It was odd, but I did end up getting taken in an ambulance to the hospital. And then my parents were there later. Like they had gone home. My dad had driven me there. He had driven back to Washington, D.C. My mom drove up to see me when I was in the hospital, and my dad drove up to see me. They really are loving parents. So I remember I got put on 1 milligram of Risperdal, which for me at that time was not the optimal dose at all. It was the year 2000. 2000. Yeah, it was the year 2000. And I don't know why they put me on just 1 milligram of it, because what I ended up needing was 4 times that much when they finally got things figured out. but it took some time for me to get on the right dose. So I'm still 17. I'm trying to get all the way to 41. Okay, let me tell more. Like my mom drove me home after that. My dad drove all the way back to Washington D.C., but my mom drove me home, and I was just on 1 milligram of Risperdal, and it was not keeping me in a great way. Like, I remember doing kind of peculiar, odd things in a hotel because we stayed halfway through because she was having a lot of trouble driving me home. It's like she was afraid that I was going to jump out the car door, and I was like holding on to it, and it was very concerning. And I don't know what she says about me when I was in the hotel room that night, was that I spent all night reading the Gideon Bible just because it was like something to read, and I like read half the Bible. I don't remember reading that much of it, but and I'm not a biblical reader usually, but but that was interesting. But okay, so I got home to Tennessee, and one major thing I remember was having a terrible side effect, which was gross to even mention. I don't even want to mention it, but what it was a thing called lactation, and you can look it up because I'm not talking about that more. We figured that out with the doctors eventually, but another thing about it was I just felt totally lost. I felt totally like my life was just going down the drain, and I didn't understand why, and I was just very confused about like everything had seemed successful about my life, and it was just like I had to go home, and I didn't quite understand where I was going with life, so I was really confused about everything. And um so like I ended up just kind of existing. And I did work a few little jobs down in that time. I tried to audit a course at a local college, and one in yoga, one in poetry, and I was tutoring in a math lab. We had a cool college that no longer is here, but so then in I think it was early the next year, 2001, my sister Anna called on the phone and said, we had known that she was studying abroad for a full year on a Watson Fellowship. And so she said, I really wouldn't mind if Maggie came with me to Costa Rica. And so somehow she talked directly to me and got the bee in my bonnet, and my parents thought it was a horrible idea with what was going on with me. But she actually got me to be able to do that. And so that really was good for my next little bit there. I spent 3.5 months, I think 3 months and a week or something like that, in Costa Rica early in 2001, and that was wonderful. And I could talk more about it, but this is about mental illness. And so what I'm going to say is when I got back, it was like culture shock city. And like I got back to Washington, D.C. That's where I landed because my dad, he worked there. There was a place for me to stay in Washington, D.C. So when I got back from Costa Rica, I got really bad culture shock, but it wasn't only culture shock, it was another episode of whatever I had. And at that point, there was this doctor in Washington, D.C. Well, once they got me off the roof of a car and the charges, yeah, there was a few things that happened. So, okay, so I had another major episode. I guess you might call this one psychotic, but also manic. So, so I had a manic episode, and I thought I was getting married to this guy who worked for my dad. I was standing on a roof of a car to look over a fence. I really just wanted to see if my wedding was back there, but it didn't make a bit of sense to anybody, and it really was just a delusion. And the police came. I don't know if they put handcuffs on me. I don't remember. I guess they didn't. I'm very confused. I'm lucky. But I don't remember that part, but I remember being in jail. Maybe they did put them on me. I don't even remember that part. But I remember being in jail for one night in DC. And my dad was a very valiant father, and at that time at least. And not today. No, I'm just kidding. He's really nice. But he's like 80 something. So he doesn't do much for me anymore. But um he was valiant, and he got me out of jail in one day with this really good lawyer who, like, I don't know, he was a Mennonite. I don't know why that's relevant, but I still was really out of it mentally, and so I went into a hospital, directly into a hospital. I guess that's how they got me out of the situation. And the doctor in his name was Dr. Peterson. Am I allowed to say that? And he was doing these studies on medicine, and I don't think I was on a study right off. I'm trying to remember. I might have been, because he was that was one way that we got to afford the hospitalization. Maybe it was later. I don't remember if I got hospitalized into a study right then. But at one point I was in a study with him. He was a pretty good doctor. He really was a good doctor. Um and I spent some time with him. I was there in the hospital in DC just for a week that time. I was also in the previous hospital for 1 week both times. So at that point I got diagnosed bipolar. And it would change later on with future discussing with psychiatrists. It would change to schizoaffective type bipolar, which is a very similar diagnosis. And it doesn't really matter to a person who has the illness. I don't think that it should matter if you have one or the other. I mean, as long as you're doing your best to feel better and to do the things you need to do to be better. At that point, seeing Dr. Peterson really did one good thing for me. It instilled in me that I do need to take medicine. He got the Risperdal in the right dose. He brought it up to 4 milligrams. He gave me a mood stabilizer. That was Depakote. Maybe it took a while for him to give me Depakote. I think all he did at that point, the first time I went in, was give me 4 milligrams of Risperdal. Yeah, it took all the way until the next time when I saw Dr. Peterson for him to do the Depakote. So the first thing he did, he just upped my Risperdal. And I was doing all right. I mean, I wasn't having episodes at that point for a little while, so at least that was good. I was in DC for a while longer. Let me jump ahead to future episodes because I don't need to tell my whole life story. The next time I went to see Dr. Peterson, and to spend a week with him. No, I think I spent a whole month because it was a study, and that was sucky. It was in October, and I really wanted to be outside, and that was a big reason that I didn't like that. But at that point, once I got to be older, to a certain age, I got cut off my dad's health insurance, and I needed a way to get treated. And so I went into a study because I couldn't afford it otherwise. So, That Depakote study, it was a placebo study, and that's something to think about. If you're ever going in a study, you might not want to do it if it's a double-blind placebo study, because you might get put on just like sugar. Like, you might just get a placebo, like something that isn't going to help you. But I'm not sure what I was on, but when I got out of it, I did start to even off. I don't know. But I was pretty volatile emotionally for, like, okay, I have written down on my little outline age 17 to 27. I don't know why exactly. 17 was the first episode. 27 just happens to be 10 years. But when I was 27, I had been hospitalized one additional time in Kingsport, Tennessee, in which, I'm confused. There are a lot of things I forget, but I think that at one point Dr. Peterson might have asked me to take Seroquel, and maybe that's what it was. I didn't get put on Depakote by Dr. I'm confused. I don't know. There was this medicine Seroquel that I started to take, and it made me throw up. And so I only took it a little tiny bit, and then I had to go back into a hospital. And I ended up in one in Kingsport, Tennessee. And actually, I think that was the point. There are some holes in the story, but I think that's the point where I got on Depakote. And Depakote's a mood stabilizer, and it stabilized me. I still was known as being bipolar at that point. I still had doubts around the diagnosis, like what it meant to be that, but I was living my life. It's really hard to summarize all this, because there are a lot of things that happened and ways that I felt over time. I felt really much like a void early in that whole diagnosis period. Like 17 to like 24, I felt horrible. I wasn't a happy person. 24 to 26, I might have still just felt really bad a lot of the time, like about who I was because of the mental illness diagnosis, even though it was a wrong diagnosis. But by the time I got to 27, I had had a couple successes. I had a full year as an intern for this thing, and I got to do something kind of empowering in a way with these 4 women. And then I went straight into a college that I actually was able to stay in. I had dropped out of college so many times, but I ended up being able to stay in it. But so I actually did graduate that college. But let's see here. I'm going to skip ahead. Current struggles is something that I have down. So, well, let me say that, like, in 2019, I was hospitalized one more time. But I did go 15 years without the hospitalization. So that was a great achievement. But in 2017, I think I was 37 years old, and I was hospitalized one more time. At that point, we knew for sure that the diagnosis was wrong with the bipolar, and so it was called schizoaffective type bipolar, which it doesn't really matter. It's just how they treat you. It helps them treat you better. And there's this medicine that they often prescribe around here for people with that diagnosis, and it's called Trileptal or oxcarbazepine. And I started taking that in 2019, and that really seems to be a good medicine. It's made it so that, like, for many years in there, I had a lot of, like, hypomania and mania, but, like, it's made it so that I just get depression. So, like, I get a ton of depression lately. So that's where we're at now. So my current struggles are a lot of depression and the fact that I'm losing my disability, possibly, which seems a very likely scenario. Um, and I am gonna cut it kind of short in the current era, but I'm gonna say that my hopes about the future are that I figure out how to be less depressed. Um, and I would not be surprised if I go 15 more years without being hospitalized. I really think that'll happen. And if you struggle with these things and you're trying to keep out of the hospital, I do have suggestions for you. My first one is be kind of religious about taking your medicine. I don't mean actually religious, but it's something that is really important to you. It's the most important thing that you need to do. I just feel like that's true. Some people don't think you need medicine, but I think that if you have this type of a diagnosis, you probably do. So do follow the doctor's orders. Another thing you can do is therapy. Lately, mine hasn't felt like it helped. I feel like I don't know what to do about that. But having supportive people around you is something that helps tremendously, but most people don't have a way to do it. Being able to be sure that you have shelter is something that is tremendously important for people with mental illness. Um, but it's hard for that to be accomplished by many. All of your basic needs being met, that's really hard for a lot of people with mental illness. That's why I think it's important that a lot of people with mental illness should be able to get disability. But nothing I'm saying is ground shaking news, but I hope that it helps somebody to listen to this.